Welcome everybody to this webinar on housing in Atlantic Canada, innovative solutions to tackle the housing crisis, hosted by the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce and StrategyCorp Inc. My name is Will Robertson. I'll be facilitating our webinar today. Krista Ross, who's the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, will be moderating our panel discussion with our distinguished guests. We have the Honourable Jill Green here, who's now Minister of Social Development and Minister responsible for housing. We also have Mayor Rogers, your worship, welcome, from the City of Fredericton, and Aidan Grove-White, who is a Vice President here at StrategyCorp, and we're all very happy to join you and look forward to this important event. Prior to handing it over to the Minister, I would just say we're going to have some introductory remarks from the Minister, followed by Aidan, and then we will have a panel discussion which will last roughly 30 to 35 minutes, and then a time allotted for Q&A at the end. So please do submit your questions. Not all of them will be answered, but we will endeavor to have as many of them answered as we can. And with that, Minister, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. And thank you for wanting to hear about New Brunswick's housing strategy and how we're planning to move forward and the journey that we've taken. So they've just asked me to give a few, short remarks. And so I thought maybe I'd just explain kind of the process that we've taken to build our housing strategy. And then I'm sure with some of the question and answers, we can get into some of the specifics in the housing strategy. But in October of last year, I was named Minister responsible for housing. And at that point, housing was kind of embedded within our Department of Social Development and had a team that was responsible for it, but they had no singular mandate to solve the housing crisis for New Brunswick. And when I was named housing minister, or minister responsible for housing, started to really dig into were we in a crisis? What was causing? The answer very quickly was yes. What was causing that crisis? And then starting to understand who all the stakeholders were that were playing within the housing continuum in New Brunswick. And quickly came to the realization that it was multifaceted why we are in the situation we are. And much of it has been developed over many, many years, decades, in fact, and just an eroding of kind of having our eye on the prize related to housing in New Brunswick. And this is not any different in New Brunswick than it is anywhere else in Canada, and actually worldwide, we're having a housing crisis. But began a journey where we were connecting with all the stakeholders to understand what role they played in the housing continuum, understanding where they saw gaps in the services that the province provided and the work that they were doing to try to enable more housing to happen, and decided we needed a process. And the process was to set up a summit, a housing summit. And it began with a virtual summit where we were formulating what the problem was, agreeing what the gaps were, and start to have all the stakeholder groups think about innovative solutions to solve the housing crisis in New Brunswick. That was followed up in May with an in-person one-day summit where we had over 200 people in the room that care about housing and care about solving the crisis in New Brunswick together to really put the innovative ideas on the table. And, through the journey we've been through, we knew that we needed a team focus on solving the housing strategy. And to do that, we rolled the housing corporation that had existed kind of within social development out to be an entity on its own. So we created a new standalone Crown Corporation to be responsible for everything from social housing, affordability around housing, to actual market housing in New Brunswick. And looking at the role of all the different stakeholders within that too, and learned so many important things. In our summit, we actually had over 100 innovative ideas presented to us from different stakeholders within the housing continuum. And then our team, it was a multidisciplinary team within the provincial government that then began looking at all those innovative solutions and identifying the ones that we believed would have the most impact in the fastest way on shifting things and really changing how we look at housing and the supports we have for affordability for housing in New Brunswick. And we released our housing strategy was last week. It was last week. We released our housing strategy, fairly well received. It had things in there to deal with direct to tenant benefits, with workforce housing, student housing, support for skilled workforce, because we know we don't have enough skilled workforce to build the housing that we need. Within the housing strategy, we identified the targets that we set for ourselves so that we can then measure our progress and make changes if we need to, which this is supposed to be an evolving, ever evolving document. So our housing strategy has a horizon of 10 years, but we're really focusing on things that we can put in place in the next 2 to 3 years to have the biggest effect and the biggest change within the housing continuum here in New Brunswick. So I'm hoping we're going to get a chance to talk about some of the specifics that are in our housing strategy, but I can tell you that across Atlantic Canada, the housing ministers are working together to try to solve the housing crisis in Atlantic Canada. Our premiers are working together and supporting us. And each one of us is sharing with each other what we're doing and how we're doing it so that we can really have some commonality across Atlantic Canada on dealing with housing issues. So maybe I'll leave it at that, and then we can get into specifics about what's in the strategy and I can answer questions around it. But there's been a huge effort. This is an all of government and all of stakeholder type of housing strategy, and everybody's going to be lifting to try to make things better in New Brunswick. And anything we're learning, we're sharing with our counterparts across Atlantic Canada.
Great. So, hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Aidan Grove-White from StrategyCorp, and I'll just give a little bit about why we were really interested in hearing about the New Brunswick approach. In my work with my colleagues at StrategyCorp, we work across the entire development, housing, land use, and infrastructure sector with clients that are private sector, public sector, not-for-profit sector, Indigenous communities and organizations. So we really get to get this unique 360-degree perspective on a lot of land use issues. And as the minister mentioned a moment ago, we also see that it's happening everywhere, and it looks a little different everywhere. And it looks a little different in big cities like Vancouver, Toronto, or Montreal, and it looks different in medium-sized cities, however you might define those, and it looks different in rural places. But we are starting to see the pinch everywhere. And like so much that we all experienced through those years of the pandemic and the uncertainty, a lot of the problems that we had going into the pandemic were really just exacerbated afterwards. And I think the housing crisis across the country really stands as an example of that, where places that maybe had just a little bit of a pinch, a little bit of pressure on their housing systems, suddenly found themselves highly desirable for perhaps mobile employees, or people returning home, going back to those social networks that proved to be so important to all of us. So at StrategyCorp, we really try to take a holistic approach. We like to look at what other jurisdictions around the world are doing, but certainly we look within Canada, and we were really excited to see New Brunswick come out with a plan as they did, and we really wanted to dig into it and hear from the minister, and in particular about how she sees this plan working towards ending the crisis in housing affordability. But also we wanted to get into a conversation about some of the things that we've noticed, both in our own practice, but from our colleagues from coast to coast to coast, around the kinds of partnerships that are necessary to solve the housing crisis. It can't just fall on government. It doesn't matter what political stripe you are. My firm is every political stripe, pretty much. You can imagine we all work together on projects, and I tell you, when we all come together and we have all the different political colors working on a problem, the solutions are a lot more durable. They're a lot stronger. There's also, it's not just about building houses. This is something we've heard everywhere from every type of actor in the system. It's about the kinds of community and also hard infrastructure that's required to make these places livable. And then finally, we have to have a real conversation about supply. At the end of the day, we have more demand than supply, and we can't lose sight of that. but we also need to look at what kind of supply we're creating. Are we creating the kinds of places that are making the most efficient use of our resources? Because if we spend it on one thing, we can't spend it on another thing. And are we making sure that when we come up with policies and programs and initiatives that we're actually focused on the things that we want to see happen, and making sure our policies align with that versus finding ways of discouraging those things we don't want to see happen. And we've found in our work with local governments across, certainly across Ontario, that sometimes we need to go and take a closer look at how we've aligned those incentives and disincentives up. Because, you know, something that might have made sense 25 years ago for the problems of 25 years ago might actually be getting in our way today. And other programs just might not be performing. So that I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I've been really excited about it this whole time leading up to it. And thanks to all of you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Aidan, and thank you, Minister Green, for your opening remarks. I'm really excited about our panel today as well for a couple of reasons. One of the most important issues that we hear about all the time now is housing, and it's affecting so much of our private sector. It's affecting our not-for-profit members, our community members, our immigration efforts, our labor force attraction, and on and on. It's connected to everything that we do. And secondly, and this was confirmed with Minister Green's remarks, we're focusing on solutions. And we've all talked about this problem a lot. And it's not unique to this jurisdiction for sure. But what are we actually going to do about it? What can we do, both in the short term and the long term? So we have an exciting hour coming up, I'd say. So I'd like to get right to it with our panel. And I'm going to start our panel questions today with our Mayor Kate Rogers. And certainly if you'd like to say a few opening remarks, but also answer my first question, which is, I'd like you to talk a bit about how the new housing strategy will benefit Fredericton and municipalities that are similar to I'd like to have seen implemented or in the future.
Thank you. So first off, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel. I always enjoy talking about housing, mainly because it does impact all of our residents. And increasingly, affordable housing is touching everyone, and everyone seems to be impacted by the challenges with affordability. So as leaders, it's incumbent on us to be talking about the big issues that impact our residents. And so thank you for providing this opportunity in this venue to discuss this issue. We've been talking about it at the city for a very long time. It used to be municipalities' only touch point with housing was through the development process, the planning and development. And increasingly, we're seeing that we're very much needing to be involved in ensuring that not only do developments get passed, but that the right types of development that meet the need of today, that they're the ones that we're focusing on and that we're incentivizing the projects that are required so that we can deliver housing. There's and I chair the Fredericton Affordable Housing Committee, so we speak about affordability in housing all of the time. And the city has been engaged in doing this work now for the last couple of years. As have other cities in the province. We've really had to take a lead on this work. So it has been wonderful to have the province really step up and to be a partner. I mean, clearly, we know the provincial role in housing, but I feel since Minister Green has stepped into her role and the creation, the reignition of the Housing Corporation, which had existed before, but she grabbed onto that and saw that as an avenue to putting more focus on housing. That has been greatly appreciated because we're now seeing a real partner with the province in this work. I think the way that the engagement with the stakeholders, because as the minister pointed out, many of us have been doing this work. There are a lot of us in cities and in communities that have been doing this work. And so to work with us to create this strategy and this plan has been greatly appreciated. And I just, and then so happy to see the delivery of this plan last week. So I really want to commend the minister on doing this work in very short order, Minister Green. So you are to be commended. So thank you. I also appreciate the structure. I appreciate the size of this. It is a very digestible plan, and the 4 pillars with the 4 targets, looking at the outcomes, you know, we like having those things because we know what it is that we're working towards. It's very clear. It's very concise. Appreciate it. And there's some good stuff in the plan that speaks to some of the things that we've been talking about. Really appreciate the efforts to reduce red tape and speed up the process for subsidized housing. It has been much needed. There are many, both private and nonprofit developers who have wanted to be creating more affordable housing, but the red tape in the funding applications and through working through the subsidization programs has made it, you know, they've been really put off, and so they just haven't been engaging in the process. So, you know, the efforts to reduce red tape, I think that's awesome. Also, we've seen some things that will affect our community as a community with post-secondary institutions. There's, you know, the student housing. I think that will be a benefit. There are many of us that have been talking about the pressures of student housing. The focus has been on campus. We as a city that deliver, you know, there's a lot of housing within our city for students. There's an opportunity there, I think, to maybe expand that housing program to off-campus housing for students. But again, there's a nugget there that we can work with. I appreciate the focus on skilled trades, the acknowledgement that really that's where the challenge is. We can have all the land and all the desire to build that we want, but if we don't have the skilled trades to be building, what is the point? So I think that there's been a real recognition in this plan and an acknowledgement of what's occurring, where the pressures are, where the challenges are. I would say though, as a city, we don't see as much as ourselves, I think, in this plan as we would like. I've had the chance already to share that with the minister, and she's been very receptive in saying, you know, there's an opportunity for working groups with the cities to maybe explore that further, how we can make this plan really alive within our cities, because there is the cities are ahead. You know, we have been doing this work, so the plan speaks to incentivizing needs assessments and housing strategies and all that. Most of the cities in our province have already done that work. We have challenges that aren't experienced in the rest of the province, so sort of an urban strategy lens on top of this is really required. There are some gaps that we have noted. I know that the cities really would have wanted to see some sort of registry around short-term rentals, because that is greatly impacting our housing stock. We are giving approvals for units that we think are going to be permanent housing units that are being turned into short-term rentals. It's really impacting us, our ability to be able to track how much housing we're actually providing. We would have liked some sort of I don't like to use regulation because I don't want it to be too cumbersome, but we would have liked to have seen some acknowledgement that there's a challenge with short-term rentals and that we need to address that. I would have liked to have seen, there was a very good one of the targets speaks to having rents in line, I think within 2.5%, and it says we'll create conditions. I would like to have been there to have been a little bit more discussion on what are the pathways to get to some sort of rent regulation, so that there can be consistency and predictability for tenants. I think that would have been helpful. We also would have liked, but one thing that was extremely positive, and I have to commend, is the efforts that on the subsidized rates. So there's been this general acknowledgement that the subsidization rates were not, haven't been high enough, as well as the funding made available for the initial builds. And I think that Minister, in this plan, that you heard that, because there is going to be additional incentives for the more units that you build. So as our cities are growing, we're welcoming people from countries, and often the larger families, or bringing extended families, and we don't have the housing stock for those families, let alone affordable housing stock. So through the subsidization program, to incentivize per room you get a little, room you get a little bit more, that is I think that is very helpful. But we just touched on it. So I think that there is again, as a city, there's an opportunity to dig down on some of the recommendations that we see as positive, that, as I say, we put this urban lens on it and see how we could enhance further for the city, so that the cities could have a benefit in this. And then I think that there is the opportunity to be talking more about some of the issues that are very specific to cities. This is very much a provincial plan. I recognize, so it needs to address the issues that are happening provincially. But as a city, there are some issues that we would have liked to have seen a little bit more focus on, because we're really the ones, when you look at affordability, the cities are the ones that are really being challenged with supply, demand, and particularly the supply of affordable housing. And I know some of the other questions are going to get us to some of these issues, so I'll hold off. And there's much more that where we can weigh in, but that's sort of my high level, some good stuff. But in order for it to really resonate with cities, we're going to have to dig down a little bit deeper.
Thanks very much, Mayor Rogers. It's certainly music to the ears of a Chamber of Commerce when you hear your mayor talking about red tape reduction, because that's typically a chamber initiative or a chamber line. So thank you for that. Aidan, I'm going to ask the next question of you, and I do want to say thanks again for participating in this and helping us to present this event to our members. We have over 100 people in attendance today, and I think that speaks to the importance of this, and we really appreciate StrategyCorp being a member of the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce and engaged in the work that we do here. So my question for you is, as the province and this region and municipalities focus on addressing the housing crisis, what do you think municipalities can do to implement innovative housing solutions towards this crisis? And how can the business community get involved and contribute to those efforts as well?
Well, I think it's one of innovation in the system is it should go without saying, it's going to be critical. What we've been doing up to now hasn't been working, so we need to figure out what we're going to do different. And I think cities, urban areas across Canada have all, as I said earlier, have all been struggling in with affordability, but in their own way. And I think if I could run a municipal public service, I would definitely have some of my folks looking at other Canadian cities to see what they're doing, what kinds of partnerships are they trying to establish, because there are some really creative solutions going on right now. There's some really interesting ways that municipalities have been partnering with builders or partnering with their provinces in order to sort of find solutions that are win-win-wins for all sides. One thing that I'm really interested in right now is how we manage student population. So in Toronto, we have a lot of students. In Victoria, British Columbia, there's a lot of students. And in New Brunswick, there's a lot of students. In Fredericton, and we don't really plan for these students adequately almost anywhere in Canada. And I can see solutions that come from the private sector about, certain unit types and unit sizes that are more appropriate for students. That if we were to plan adequately for students, we would probably look to some of these different unit styles and types. And then in the off season, these units also could, in the summer semesters, for example, these student housing units could also serve as really good short-term accommodations. Some of the ones we're working with a company right now, and they've got essentially a perfect. I would have loved it when I was in school. Studio apartment with a fridge and an induction stove, and it's all very well contained, and it's a secure building. That's great for when you're a student, but then most schools don't have full student loads over the summer. And that would be a great sort of short to medium term accommodation for somebody coming to the city, rather than have what might be really long-term rental stock making its way into the short-term market. So there's some creative options that we have, and there's some of the reasons that get in our way are a little bit red tapey, like maybe there's regulation that doesn't allow us to do it a certain way. But I think before we go looking just to cut things out of the way, I think again it sort of comes back to what are we trying to accomplish, and then looking at, well, what is supporting us in accomplishing this, and what's getting in our way of accomplishing this, because there are limits to how much government's role in this is just to remove itself. There's going to be some element of that probably, but it's also going to be about where does government step in, and where does the private sector, give it its hand in partnership. And I think that one of the most important things we can do as private sector actors is to really, when the government is doing something that we need, or when we're seeing the results of whether it's municipal or provincial direction bearing fruit, we need to defend it. There are too many times that I've seen in Ontario, the province or the municipality takes a bold position to do something, for example, to encourage infill development. So infill development, for those that don't know, are when you increase the number of units available in the existing urban fabric, rather than going out to building in untouched land, normally either farmland or natural spaces. This is disruptive. It's people live in the neighborhood, they don't like the construction, they're going to have a shadow where there wasn't a shadow before, even if it's just 2 stories. And this is good. Like, this is good public policy to use these spaces and to use this infrastructure more effectively. It helps keep our own taxes low, and it is often a faster way of delivering much needed housing. But almost everywhere you do this in Canada, you get people, incumbent neighbors, fighting to not have the new neighbors join them. And a lot of politicians and a lot of business leaders don't necessarily see their role in defending those changes. And I used to be a public servant with the province of Ontario, and we worked with business improvement areas, teaching them about the benefits to local business of a new intensification project, just as a concept. Say, hey, if you're a coffee shop in, downtown Barrie or Waterloo or somewhere like that, or Prince Edward County, you benefit from having a place that maybe had, a parking lot and a sort of ramshackle storefront turning into a 50-unit development. And, you should come out to the meetings, the public meetings, and point out to people that would bring customers within walking distance of your business, and that can help revitalize a downtown and give people all sorts of reasons to be supportive. So I think that there's some direct ways that the private sector can partner with government that's going to be different in every community and every province. But I think a universal would be for the private sector to really cheer on decision makers, elected and unelected decision makers, when the going gets tough, and to stick your neck out and say, actually, we need this. This is a better use of our limited resources, whether that's land or infrastructure or tax dollars, and really don't leave it up to just particularly elected officials to be the ones to take the heat from the community when we're making difficult decisions.
That's a great comment, and I appreciate that from a Chamber of Commerce perspective, supporting development for such things as the NBX grounds for higher density residential, and supporting other projects and giving government the support they need for, performing arts centers, all of those things which bring traffic to our local businesses and support the vibrancy of our communities. So I appreciate that comment a lot. My next question, Minister Green, is for you. So we do know that the urban areas of the province are really growing quickly. Moncton is the fastest growing CMA in the country. St. John and Fredericton are also growing rapidly. We've added about 1,000 residents per year, no signs of slowing down. Mayor Rogers alluded to this as well. What do you think are the key areas of the housing strategy that would benefit the urban areas? What is it going to do for us, for our communities?
Well, we are in this place because we've had rapid immigration, which is a fantastic thing to be happening for New Brunswick, but then we need to put all the supports around that. One of the things that Mayor Rogers, when she was at the summit in St. John, she got up and talked quite passionately about her vision and her innovative solution, which I loved, and it's mine now too, is that the cities and the province work cooperatively together We identify the properties that are available. So that one of those things is in our strategy, that the province is committing to identifying all the publicly owned or provincially owned properties that are appropriate for housing and affordable housing, and then look to activate those properties to be able to begin building on them. And so that work has already started. We're going to couple that with the municipalities, and her vision was not only do I identify those properties, but we work collaboratively with our urban partners to make sure that the zoning is correct, that the services are in place for that property, and have it absolutely ready to go so it can be handed off to a developer to be able to build on that property the appropriate type of housing. And that is part of, there are a number of things within the strategy that begin that activation, but she is absolutely correct. There needs to be another lens over top of this that does specifically look at what is needed in the urban centers. This is a provincial strategy. Everybody is at a different level. Part of the goal of the strategy is to bring all of New Brunswick to the same level, so then we can all start working together collaboratively on the housing issue. Another piece of this is that to support this is a student housing, as she was discussing. Our urban centers all have universities within them. The student, they have their own growth plans that are big growth plans, and they have not activated their on-campus housing in a long time. They're putting their focus on building their programs and new buildings for their programs. It hasn't been on their residences, and they identified this gap for them. So we've identified funding to help them begin building up their on-campus residences, which will take burden off the housing within the community as well. So there's also transportation is being addressed here, but it's a regional focus. The urban centers have their transportation taken care of, but it also activates transportation in and out between communities. So there's different pieces, the workforce strategy, the skilled workforce, very big component of it. Everybody's going to benefit in New Brunswick with the work that post-secondary education, training, and labor is doing. The goal is to identify 10,000 new skilled workforce to come to New Brunswick to help us solve the housing crisis. So it's multifaceted. There's no one direct thing within the strategy for our urban centers, but there is a wholehearted commitment to get to the vision that Mayor Rogers has, where we're working collaboratively, reducing all kinds of red tape, I'm happy to say, for the chamber, by us working collaboratively, activating these properties so we can get building on them sooner rather than later, and so that the businesses and the private sector can get moving on those properties and get building for them. Also, the last piece that probably I should mention is our not-for-profits. So we have 180 not-for-profits in New Brunswick that provide 6,500 affordable housing units. They are aging as well. So within the strategy, we are activating our New Brunswick Not-for-Profit Association to help build up the existing not-for-profits, and then make us ready for new not-for-profits and co-ops so that they can build more affordable housing solutions for New Brunswickers as well. So it's multifaceted, but no direct thing related to the urban centers.
Thank you very much, Minister. I appreciate that. We are just over halfway through our time, and I've still got a couple of more questions before we go to our questions from our guests today. So what I'm going to ask, I'm going to pose the next questions to all of you, but I'm going to ask that you keep your answers brief, just so that we can get lots of opportunity to have questions from our guests today. So my next question is, how can all three levels of government work together to get more housing built, ensuring that we have that labor force to get it built quickly? You mentioned that in your comment, but I think the big question is how. So I don't know, Aidan, perhaps we'll start with you, and then get a comment from Mayor Rogers and then Minister Green.
I think we're already seeing some provinces use their provincial nominee program allocations to target those trades that we need in the construction sector in particular. I get a little bit worried sometimes because we're all like, it's competition. It's the same thing that we've done on healthcare across this country, where we compete with each other for a limited number of labor. I think one of the things we could do, and there's been some musings about it over time, is to look at how do we reduce the barriers between provinces to sharing these workers. We're a very big country. Boom in one place is often a bit of a bust in another place. And so making it easier for people to move their skills around the country to where they're needed. I think also taking a coordinated approach to, again, using incentives to encourage people to get into the trades. When I was a teenager in the 90s, we were basically told that you were going to be broke for your entire life unless you went to university, got a Bachelor of Arts, and in who knows what, but hopefully something that leads to med school. And it was actively discouraged to look at going into the trades. And that was I think a real, I don't know what we were thinking back then. But we see the result now, where even in doing a home renovation to building a super tall building in Toronto, a lack of ready access to trades is really slowing things down and adds cost. Like, that's the thing. Like, time, I used to hate it when I'd hear people say it, but time is money. Every year of inflation is just money that we might as well have set on fire.
Mayor Kate, what would you like to add to that?
So I think that the three levels of government working together is exactly what needs to happen. And when we talk about packaging up, so Joe was mentioning, this idea that we package. So part of it is packaging the land and who has the surplus land. And we do the same for our developments. We're looking at our surplus land and making it available to organizations, nonprofit organizations in particular, who are developing. But it could also be working with the private sector. And what if we do a whole package we do the package of land, but we also do the package of the programs, the subsidization programs, the ongoing, the feds are releasing more innovative programs. If we could somehow package it all together, and it requires all three levels to do that. Say we have the land, the province has the subsidization, the feds have the money for the capital. There would be ways if we could deliver that, but it does require working together to do so. Similarly, it is in the plan, the province making available their surplus land, and right now it's going through, I think, through the Housing Corp or through RDC, but potentially if we're working directly with municipalities, potentially it's going directly in working with the municipality to make the land available through that, again, to reduce that layer of red tape, right? Why does it need to go from one government department to another government department? Maybe it goes directly to a municipality, and then we help package it up. We have a housing specialist that we have just hired to do some of this work. So I believe that the three levels of government working together means drawing on, I always see it as like a housing toolbox. We all have tools that we're putting in, and it's drawing on those tools, grabbing those tools. We know that we need a more skilled workforce. All of the three cities have had record-breaking development numbers. We're over $250 million, which is significant for Fredericton. So more development numbers, more housing unit numbers, they require more, we need more skilled trade laborers. We've been fortunate in that we're keeping up a building pace, but it's challenging, and developers will say that it's a challenge. But I know that that has also been considered in this plan. There needs to be more spaces available through the programs. The community colleges need to expand those spaces. Having a 2-year waiting list for a carpenter in a day and age when we're desperate for carpenters is just nonsensical. But I do know that is being worked on at the provincial level. Through Petal is addressing that through the community college system. Apprenticeships, incentivizing businesses to provide the apprenticeships that are required. All of that is now being looked at. But then then you talk to the communities that say, but we also need to worry about housing the workers, right? So, but they're so always considering workforce housing. But for me, when we talk about how do three levels of a government work together to create more housing, we just all pitch in what we bring to the table and do it together, and we can get ahead of this together.
Minister Green, how about you? Would you like to add to this?
Yes, I think I can just say that we are kind of in an unprecedented time where all levels of government agree that we are in a crisis, and all of them have the will to be working together. I was in Ottawa last week at the beginning of the week at a housing ministers meeting with the federal, provincial, and territorial housing ministers. And we all have the same problems. We're all sharing our solutions, and we're all committed to, nobody wants to cause harm to one of their sister provinces because they're stealing all their skilled trades. So the thing about this housing strategy is it's all hands on decks intergovernmentally around solving this, and also internally, even within the provincial government. We have the post-secondary education, training, and labor who put their hands up and said, in 3 years, we are going to get this. We're going to change the apprentices program. We're going to change the barriers between the provinces, and we're going to go overseas and find more skilled workers, and we're going to get all our post-secondary education institutions working towards more skilled trades. Plus, they're working with our high schools too to get more trades back in the high schools again, because that was something that had slipped over time. So it is unprecedented. We have the ear of the federal government. They're working with us on pilot projects to look at moving the bar here in New Brunswick, and our Atlantic counterparts are all jumping on board to learn, because we're just a few steps ahead of our Atlantic counterparts, but they're learning and changing and adapting. So I think you see everybody acknowledging where we are and the work we need to do. And we're also going to admit sometimes we may not get it all right, but we're going to just keep trucking ahead and make changes as we need to do it.
Definitely, you've all touched on the need for increased participation in the trades, in labor, and certainly, you know, look at our own Facebooks. Nobody's on there saying, hey, can you recommend necessarily a lawyer, because we have a good complement of these types of services. But lots of people are on there saying, I need someone for plumbing, I need an electrician, I need someone to paint. You know, lots of the trades are in high demand. So it's a challenging issue. I have another question that I want to pose to everyone, and I'm not sure. I think it's a one that would be geared towards our elected officials, perhaps. But Aidan, I'd be super keen to hear your comments as well. We've heard from developers that the tax burden in New Brunswick is a really big hindrance to building more housing. So beyond the housing strategy, are there other plans that will stimulate more residential construction through lowering that tax burden, either at the municipal or the provincial level? What else could we do in this regard?
Do you want to go first, Mayor, or would you like me to go?
I'll go.
Okay.
I'll go. Sure, I'll take this first. I think when I speak with developers, I mean, really what they're talking about is the tax burden that they're talking about is this sort of the misnamed double tax issue. I mean, that seems to be where the greatest barrier lies. And I would say once that is gone, once we go through tax reform, have vigorous tax reform in this province, that there will no longer be that issue with the tax burden. So what really is most critical, and I think municipalities are craving it as much as I would say the development community is doing some tax reform to free up sort of our abilities to assist with development. However, that being said, you know, as I pointed out, we're at record development numbers in development. So development is happening, which indicates that the tax burden isn't maybe stopping the development, but what it is inhibiting is affordable developments. That is where the challenge lies. So what's happening is we're building too many high-end units as a way for the developers to recover the cost of that double taxation. So we desperately need the tax reform so that we can get our developers so that they're building affordable housing, housing that's affordable to tenants. When you look at, I'm obsessed with looking on Facebook Marketplace and Kijiji and for vacancies. I'm keeping constant track. I have my own little running tally of apartments and how much is available. And when you look at the availability out there is the high-end units. I mean, we have some of our beautiful high-end complexes with like for rent signs on their doors. So I feel that we have that, but that has been how developers have responded to the tax burden as they've created more high-end developments. But we have a population that needs to be mid to lower range. And in order for developers to be able to build that type of housing, which is what is desperately needed, the taxes need to be all part of it, and it needs to be fulsome tax reform, because you do one, it impacts another. Like, you can't just we can't we can't approach it in that way. We need to do it holistically.
So if I speak from the provincial perspective, there has been a lot of movement and changes with the tax around property taxes and assessments over the last 2 or 3 years, all of it recognizing the burden that is on our development community. So we've changed how non-residential properties are taxed. We did have a tax credit if you lived in the property. We have reduced that by 50%. We've also, so for new construction, we've recognized that it takes time to have a property activated and actually being able to draw revenue from the property. So we phased in our assessments for new developments. So their assessment is at 33% the first year, 66 the second, and they don't have their full assessment in place for 3 years. So there's a number of things that have been looked at and are activated. We also have put a temporary spike protection mechanism in place so that the assessment won't increase more than 10% a year. Even if the market dictates that the fair market value of the property says the assessment is higher, we've put a temporary 10% spike protection in there for the assessments. Are considering putting that in permanently, and that is in the housing strategy. One of the things we have heard from builders is they would like an HST credit on their building products. That is something that is in the 100 different solutions that were presented to us. So that is something over time we will consider. They are quite loudly saying that is required. So that is something we are certainly listening to. But there has been a lot of movement around actually how properties are assessed and taxed to try to address this and encourage more development. And I think that's why also the province's contribution towards these affordable housing units is so critical. And that's why we did look at the amounts we were contributing and putting in different amounts for different types of properties to try to address that. It's such a multifaceted approach. I think, as the mayor said, you might pull on one thread and have unintended consequences there. So these are all being worked on, but we are also very cognizant of changes can create problems elsewhere. So we're being cautious about our changes, but moving forward with them.
Aidan, did you have anything you'd like to add to this tax question?
I think super quickly, I'd echo the HST comments, particularly directed towards rental. Going back to something I said, as I said, a lot of my clients are municipalities themselves. So I would say to a municipality, see about if there's, and this isn't specific to New Brunswick, but see if there are places that you can remove the taxes in order to encourage the thing you want. Frankly, if you're getting a lot of high-end luxury homes that are paying full freight, fine. Like, they don't need a tax break, but rich people need homes too. So maybe you don't need to cut it there, but maybe when you have a developer who is looking to aim for mid-market, maybe that's where you reach an agreement with them on some tax relief. I think we can, in our rush to solve the crisis, it's important to always keep in mind, what are we trying to do? What is getting in the way, and what might help us get there? And I think, I've heard from a lot of clients who build buildings across the affordability spectrum. And one thing that they've pretty unanimously said is that some form of rebate, whether it's timed, amortized, or I'm just forgetting the word right now, for HST on purpose-built rental, that would make a really big difference on a lot of their pro formas. So it would shift a lot of them potentially away from a condo development into a rental, purpose-built rental situation. And I've heard others in the advocacy space say that this should be limited or deepened for guaranteed or regulated affordable, deep affordable. I think that looking at what are we trying to do and what is getting in the way of getting it done always is a good starting place. And then looking at what can we do that's new in order to encourage the thing that we all seem to agree we want. So I would just put it out there, sort of vague and broad, but I hope it helps.
So that's the end of the questions that we had prepared. We've still got a few minutes left. Will has been sending me questions from our audience that have been coming in through the Q&A. The first one I'm going to ask, and I guess I'll ask this to Minister Green, but feel free to jump in, either of the other two panelists. What measures can really reduce that cost of rental housing and improve affordability? We know there's some percentage of income stats in there, but what is affordable and how can we actually get there?
That's a really good question. It's something we spent quite a bit of time on in the summit. So affordable for us, the definition we're using is the CMHC definition, where families should not be spending more than 30% of their income on their housing associated costs. So that's not only your rent, but it would be your power and utilities and those kinds of things as well. So that's what we're working towards. And we're working towards a goal of having less than 15% of New Brunswickers that are paying more than 30% of their income for their housing costs. So that is a goal we set a target for ourselves. Specific measures that are in there would be related to how we contribute to the affordable units that are being built. So we do upfront contribution as well as our rent supplement program to keep them affordable. So that's a very specific one associated with affordability. Number of other different things in there, but I would say that would be the most direct thing, would be a recognition, the costs have gone up, so our contribution needs to be higher, and also the types of units that we need are different. So, you know, how we contribute to those needs to be changed, and we need to address that issue.
Thanks very much, Mayor. Kate, do you have a comment you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add, I'll speak from a municipal perspective. Part of what we talk about is affordable by design. So how is it that we can ensure that affordable housing is being built so that it's delivered in an affordable way, but also so that it is built in an affordable way? And so I look even at the housing market. I know you asked specifically about rentals, but I'll start with housing. We look at the housing market, that average housing price in Fredericton is $350,000. I know that's music to the ears of people living in central Canada, but for Fredericton, New Brunswick, and our wages, it's very high. But again, do we all, and that's because this housing is often predicated on larger lots and they're bigger houses, bigger than probably what people need. Maybe we need to rethink what it is that we require in housing. Maybe through our zoning, we have narrower lots and we're creating subdivisions with narrower lots and smaller houses. And I would say similarly in the rental market, same approach be taken at developers looking, if the end is that we want to get to being able to deliver an affordable product, how is it that we build more affordably? And we're looking within and saying, what can we do as a municipality? And that is certainly looking at our zoning bylaws, all of the land use regulations. Also, how do we incentivize affordability? Right now we have bonus density zoning, so that if you can put on get more density if you ensure that it's to deliver affordable housing. But are there ways that we can look at other ways to incentivize that? So I think a lot of it is us really looking within what levers that we have to pull internally so that we can get the product that we want in the end. And for me, I just always go back to affordable by design. Let's build it affordably so that it can be delivered affordably.
If I could jump in for just one quick sec, I could not agree more on affordable by design. And I think one of the things where municipalities and provinces working together can really advance affordable by design is to liberalize the creation of secondary units in existing properties. In Toronto, we used to have a pretty decent stock of basement apartments in some of our old Victorian or Edwardian neighborhoods. There's been probably the last 10 years a wave of gentrification, which saw a lot of those turn into just single family homes from duplexes. So I think a combination of making it easier for people to build particularly in historic downtowns where a lot of this pressure is the highest, but also where you have services for people within walking distance who maybe need that affordable lifestyle that a downtown area can provide. Make it easier. It's a lot of getting out of the way, and sometimes it might be a little bit of an incentive thrown in there as well. to have homeowners, sometimes empty nesters with 5 bedrooms, a couple in their 60s with 5 bedrooms, maybe, find a way to help them, downsize in place so that they're downsizing without a downgrading. And they're creating a new unit for somebody to come in and have that affordability by design.
I have a question that just came in, basically asking about the plans to support the growth of shelter spaces, social supportive housing, high acuity individuals. What do you think is, first of all, Minister, in the plan for that, but also what else can we or should we be doing?
So this plan and the Housing Corporation is its focus is social housing, affordable housing, and market housing. The homeless, and I think the question is probably more around the homelessness piece of this, which is outside of the housing strategy and the Housing Corporation. That being said, it's not off my own plate because I'm also the minister responsible for social development. So there is, and part of the reason I have both those portfolios because it must be integrated, the two of them together. So it must be working very, very closely together. The one piece the housing strategy has in it, and which is a commitment that was made before for $100 million for new public housing units. Part of our responsibility as a housing corporation and within the strategy is to make sure we're building purpose-built public housing to meet the needs of our homeless population as they transition from homelessness into housing. And so that work, it's interesting. I had a conversation about that this morning of how what we build as our public units really needs to be focused on who's coming into these public housing units. And so there's more to come on that. It's not specifically addressed in this, but in my dual role, it will be addressed, and there will be a homelessness strategy that will be also come out that will talk about that piece of it. I'm just not quite ready on that one yet. I've only been in social development for about a week, so I need a little more time.
We'll give you another week and then we'll come.
All over again.
We are getting very close to our end time, but I'm going to make the decision that we're going to go over a little bit because I've got questions pouring in and I really want to get a few more of them answered, but I will ask you to keep your answers brief, and I'm not going to go to each of you for every question. I do have a question, and I guess, Minister, this is a bit for you. Your target in this plan is 6,000 starts or 6,000 units. The Housing Hub has said we need 10,000. And back in the 70s, we were doing about 8,000 a year. So what will that look like? You mentioned that we need to have let me see, we need to create the conditions, I guess is what the report says. What are the conditions that would allow us to have 6,000 or 8,000 or 10,000 starts?
So the most we've ever had in a year is 4,680, at least in the recent history, and that was last year. And we're all talking about skilled trades and all those things associated with it. So the lens in this housing strategy was to support all of that. So it has more contributions, it has skilled trades, it's looking at all our policies and procedures. It looks like our relationships with our urban centers. What Aidan talked about early on about the not in my backyard syndrome, that is huge. And I think, after especially discussions with our mayors, when I was presenting the strategy, they all talked about this. And I think as a province, we need to start talking about the fact that we need to be open to new innovative ideas. And a lot of that is densification in our urban centers because, they do have the ecosystems to support where we're building to. So there are so many things within the strategy that support us getting to 6,000, but they all have to work hand in hand. And we need all the stakeholders on board as well, rowing the same direction with us, or we're never going to get to the 6,000. So we'll make adjustments as we go along, but almost every piece of this strategy is to support those 6,000 builds a year.
Thank you for that. Again, I want to mention that we're going to go a bit over time, but what I will say is that we have so many questions that have come in that I think we'll submit them to our three panelists and see if we can get some answers, and the chamber will commit to publishing those answers. We're planning to do an article on this, and we'll be posting the link to the webinar for our members and sharing it on our social media. So we'll hopefully get some answers to some of the other questions and add that to the post when they're available. A question came in about CMHC, which is really focused on energy efficiency, sustainability. And the question is if the province or the municipality will be working collaboratively with them and looking at things like net zero and those types of things.
I can say 100%. I have Mr. Hussein's personal cell phone number. So when I have issues, I call him and talk to him. He's responsible for CMHC. We are working very collaboratively with them. And some of the things that we have within the strategy are new innovative ideas that they have committed to working on with us. We know they're developing new things that they're coming out with all the time, and they are hearing our voices. So we are working very, very collaboratively with them and trying to move these files forward, and also asking them to think about New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada maybe a little differently than some of the other provinces that have very major urban centers compared to what we have here in Atlantic Canada. And they are hearing us. Sometimes it takes long to push things through the system with them, and we'll work on that as well. But they are committed to trying to find the right solutions with us.
And I'll say too, we have someone from CMHC sits in our affordable housing committee, quite a senior person in with the organization, and we work closely with him. There has been, funds that have been made available through the federal program, the Rapid Housing Initiative, and now we're going to be seeing the Housing Accelerator Fund, which we're all excited about. I know the ministers, Minister Green's excited about it, Mr. Sain's excited about it. Everyone in the housing community is, because of the ongoing opportunity that's going to come with that Housing Accelerator Fund. But we have a person, I say, with CMHC that we work directly with on any of the proposals that we're making. Fredericton was successful in receiving funds through the Rapid Housing Initiative. We work very closely with CMHC in the delivery of those projects, and we too have been helping, giving ideas to help shape some of these other programs. I feel that accelerator fund that's coming through the feds is a very responsive program, and allowing us, the communities, to sort of tailor it to their needs. We have some great ideas for things that we want to do with that funding in Fredericton, but that is, again, the magic of that relationship of working with the right people, the people that you need to be working with to get these things across the line, to get these housing developments across the line. And CMHC is a very important player in that.
Mayor Kate, I'm going to ask the next question of you that's come in, and I'll actually read it. What does Mayor Kate think of the new inclusionary zoning regulation that would allow local governments to adopt a bylaw that requires developers to provide a certain percentage of new multi-unit developments as affordable housing?
So I will give an official response. And so we looked into, there's the cities, there are different cities in New Brunswick that looked into the inclusionary zoning to see if it would make a substantial difference, if the requirement of inclusionary zoning would make, I talk about, the magic bullet, or, that secret ingredient that's going to incite and that's just going to require affordability in each housing development. The research and the analysis that was provided to us indicated that in New Brunswick, that wasn't necessarily the secret sauce, right? That there were other ways to better ways to get to affordability, whether it be through incentivization, sort of this how we're trying to do it with densification. You're incentivized to build more affordable housing. That study indicated that there were better ways to get to affordability than a required inclusionary zoning. But I think, like any good leader does, you question that research that's been provided to you. I would like to, but I'm a data-based, evidence-based decision maker, so we are following through with that. And I will say that the upside of seeing it would be easy to say, 25% across the board inclusionary zoning. When the research came back to us, it said that's actually not going to get you the affordability you require. It forced us as a municipality to dig deeper and look at what else, then what can we do? If that's not the secret sauce, what is? And that is when we got to, we need to be looking at our zoning regulations. How can we create more affordable by design? We need to be working with the nonprofit sector to really enhance the nonprofit sector, specifically in Fredericton. In the province, it's the nonprofit housing sector, depending on where you are in the province, it's more robust. We're like, how can we make that sector more robust in Fredericton? So we've been doing that. How can we free up land in our land bank to be doing? So I think that by not just looking at blanketed inclusionary zoning as being the only solution, it's made us look at other solutions that we know and that we're seeing are having that we're getting some positive there's some positive outcomes. So that's sort of my high level response to the inclusionary zoning question.
Thank you for that. And I have a couple of questions that have come in here from, I'm going to presume they're from developers. One of them is wondering about the thought of forgoing property tax during the construction period for multi-residential builds has been considered. And if it hasn't been considered, could it be? And I'm going to add a second question, also presumably from a developer, wondering about tax incentives that would incent builders to build homes like what Fredericton knows all about, the old Dobie homes, focusing on affordability, energy efficiency, housing density. So 2 questions. And
Maybe I can start with that one. The property tax question is really complicated in most jurisdictions, actually, because we do assessments at fair market values, and we've made changes around how those assessments can increase. But in municipalities, they are responsible to set the tax amounts, although the province collects the taxes. So it is a very complicated relationship that there's always opportunity to make changes and improve things, but it's a very collaborative discussion and decision making that would have to be done. With this housing strategy, we really focused on things we could implement quickly, and we would see big feedback or return on our investment very quickly. You know, within the fiscal framework we're within. Discussions around that, certainly the province, I can say, is very, very open to it, and I think that the municipalities probably would be too. But that is a longer term solution that would require legislative changes, all kinds of things that would take much longer to implement. So therefore, although they are things we have talked about and are considering, it's not an immediate thing that was presented in the housing strategy.
And when I talked about the tax reform earlier too, I mean, that's sort of, I think what Minister Green's alluding to is, you know, the taxation, it's more than just looking at that piece. Really, it all does need to be looked at. When we went through local governance reform, that was a promise that came out of local governance reform, is that the province and the municipalities were going to work together to embark on a tax reform journey that I think that needs to consider all of those things. And as for the question about, you know, we call it the Dobie houses or the post-war houses that we have in our city, I love those neighborhoods so much. That's what I'm talking about. So when I'm talking about us playing with our zoning, they're on small lots, they're small houses. It was purpose-built housing for a certain population post-war. We definitely need to get back at that our needs assessment and then our housing strategy pointed to that specifically. And that is the work that we're doing as we speak, is looking at our zoning bylaws for how we can create the conditions for a developer to build that kind of a house.
I know that at least one of our panelists, Minister Green, you have another appointment immediately following. In fact, you may be late because of me extending.
I'm late.
So, my apologies.
Yeah.
You can blame me for that. But what I would like to do to close the event is I would like to give each of you an opportunity for a final word. Aidan, I'd like to start with you. Then we'll go to Minister Green and we'll end with our mayor.
I think if there was one thing I could ask everyone to do is again, focus on what it is that we're trying to get done before we reach for the different tools. There's that old expression, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, there's also, if you just keep reaching for the hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I think that we need to take a pan-partisan approach to the housing problem. We need to find durable, politically durable solutions that last changes in government, because they have that broad-based support as much as possible. And I think just one last thing, I'd make a plug again for make it easier for homeowners to create some of those units in their existing structures, that affordability by design, because that can be done relatively quickly, and it can be done without having a huge assembly of trades. So you can sort of skip past some of the problems with major changes, with major projects, and you can start seeing a result quickly, and one that most people can live with. It's just, more people joining them in their neighborhood, not new structures going up 4, 5, 6 stories tall.
Minister Green, what's your final word?
Well, thank you very much for inviting us to do this, Krista. The housing strategy has just come out. We're getting all the feedback on it now. The goal was to be very balanced with that strategy. I think we've met that goal, because there's nobody jumping up and down feeling like they won the lottery with this housing strategy. But there's been some very thoughtful comments on it, and we are collecting all those comments and considering them as we move forward. This is just the start. This housing strategy is the start. It is not the end. And what I like, what Aidan said about doing a politically durable strategy, that's our goal here, is that, if I'm not sitting here in a year's time, then there is somebody coming along behind that's saying there's all these good things in place. How can I just build on what's already been done? So that is the goal with this. And, if there's more thoughts and feedback on this, we are carefully considering what everybody's saying, and we'll be, coming forward with new things going forward, because, as I said, this is the start, not the finish.
Thanks very much, Minister Green. And I too made note of the term politically durable solutions. It's not a way I've heard it phrased before, and I like it. So thank you for that. And a final word, Mayor Rogers.
Yes, well, first, I too will say thank you. Thank you for providing this forum for us to speak about this. I've learned a lot, some new terminology that I'll certainly be using, but just exploring it, the plan further with the minister, and also and having someone, and Aidan, I've really appreciated your perspective as well, because of how it's yet another set of eyes, and some more brain power looking at this, a different perspective. So I've really appreciated this conversation. So I want to say thank you. I know that we're all in on housing for all, and I feel it, and I just always think I always go to the why. So the why it is that we need to do things, and I know when I look at what's happening with housing and with affordability, and because housing has become so unaffordable for so many, it has put so many pressures on other parts of our system. Sometimes people's paychecks only covers the cost of their housing, and they have to figure out how to live otherwise. And so they're drawing on other community groups and nonprofits who are delivering services. And it's just, housing seems to be where it begins, right? If we can provide affordable housing, then we can ensure better lives for the people that we represent. And so I feel that it's just any opportunity I have to talk about how it is that we can deliver more affordability in housing, I think is a good day. It's time well spent, because it is in the end going to impact everyone's lives. It's going, and their whole lives, their entire lives. So we have to get this right, and we have to be sharing ideas, and we have to be, again, laser focused on getting to that end product of affordability in housing. So thank you for providing this venue.
Well, I want to thank all of you, Aidan and the team at StrategyCorp, for co-hosting this event with the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce, and Aidan for you being a panelist with us, and your team for putting it together. I'd really like to thank Minister Green and Mayor Rogers for joining the panel today, because it's challenging to step forward and take questions when you have a brand new report like this. But because it is something that we've all been thinking about and worrying about and working on for quite some time now. We've all got a lot of good ideas, so it's great to have the opportunity to share those ideas. And as I mentioned, we will be sharing this on our social media, the taping of the recording of the event, and we'll also be writing an article that will include some of the answers to the questions that were provided. And as well, I have at least 6 more questions to send to each of you for some input. So that will be your homework. But again, thank you so much, Minister Green, Mayor Rogers, Aidan, and our friends at StrategyCorp. Thank you very much. And thanks to our guests for attending, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.